Welcome back to, I believe, episode 4 of the Q&A series, where every single week I answer your questions as a watch dealer, whether that be business related, watch related, life related. You ask it down in the comments and I'll answer it. As always, all of the questions answered in this episode are linked in the description, so you'll see every question as well as a timestamp. So if you're here just to see my answer to a specific question, you can skip straight to that. And as I say, the best thing to do to get your question answered is leave it down in the comment section of this video. If it doesn't get answered after a couple of episodes, feel free to put it again or email me info@kibblewatches.co.uk. And as always, if you want to remain anonymous or you want just your first name or you want abbreviations, however you want it to be spoken out, tell me either in the comments or in email, just so I obviously don't say your name or your YouTube handle. Now, before we crack on with the questions, what's on wrist? Because I forgot to do it last week, so my apologies. I'm wearing a wonderful Oris automatic pointer date from around the sort of circa early 2000s, potentially very late 1990s. It comes with a bracelet, and the really interesting thing about this one is the pointer date goes backwards. As you can see, so rather than going clockwise, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around to 31, this goes anti-clockwise, and I don't think I've actually seen that on another one. So don't know why they did it, but it's pretty cool and quite quirky. Lovely thing. It's going to be off for a service and polish before it is ready, but it will be one that is likely coming for sale. But in the meantime, before it goes away, I'm wearing it and enjoying it. The dial is lovely. The highlights are blue. It really is a lovely thing. So we have 7 great questions today. Thank you very much for leaving those questions. And we're going to start with question 1 from G. He says, do box and papers matter? What a great question. Something I am asked all of the time and a common cause for debate sometimes in the watch world. I'm going to give you the short answer. No, box and papers do not matter. Now, the second part of the answer is it can sometimes be a bit complicated. Now, it goes without saying, if you're a collector and you focus on collecting sets and that's your thing and you want box and papers, you know, knock yourself out, go for it. Spend that extra time and that extra money, get the box and papers and sort of collect what you like. Now, if you are just after a certain watch, let's say this Oris, for example, trying to find box and papers can be quite tricky, and there's multiple reasons for that. Boxes are generic to the period. There are, of course, some exceptions. The Rolex Midas, for example, comes with a beautiful Midas box. Again, still generic to the Midas, but a more special box than a standard Rolex box. So that's something to keep in mind. Boxes are generic. Boxes get lost. They get thrown away. They can also be acquired again, and you can build a set. The only thing that's ever born with a watch is the original paperwork, whether it be the card or the signed paperwork. And again, we're getting into more details here. Paperwork can be forged. Blank papers can be bought online. You can buy 90s Rolex paperwork which has not been signed, and you can literally write in the details if you wish. So there are some scrupulous people out there and people out to basically build a set that do stuff like this. So this is why I personally, especially on older watches, do not put much emphasis on box and papers. If I have it, it's a nice thing to have and it's obviously going to demand a premium. However, I do not source that out. I focus on the watch first and foremost, the condition of it, the example, the originality, all of those things come first and foremost. And if it happens to come with extra gubbins, the box and papers, it's a nice add-on. But again, it's not my focus. Another thing, a lot of people, unfortunately still, surprisingly, put emphasis on box and papers equaling originality. That is just not true. Do not put emphasis on box and papers equaling originality. I have seen and handled many fake watches that come with complete box sets, even modern watches where the paperwork is matched to the watch, down to the serial number. They are matching. Even those new RFIDs or whatever it's called, where you hover the phone with the card and it loads up the page. Even some of them are doing that now with Rolex and Cartier specifically that I have seen. So please do not put emphasis on the box and papers equaling originality. With modern watches, does it help? Of course it can. And there are exceptions. As I say, modern Rolex, I would prefer, and by modern I mean 2015, 16 onwards, I would much prefer to have it with box and papers because it does make a difference to the price, and it also makes a difference with the kind of buyers who buy these things typically wanting box and papers. Hopefully, that long ramble has explained a few caveats and points to box and papers, and something that often comes up and I try and educate and give information on. But in short, box and papers doesn't matter, especially on old watches, and I get a lot of people ask for a 1965 watch that they want, and they want it to have box and papers. what you have to remember is in 1965, the boxes were literally a box to transport that watch home in or to and from wherever it was. And after that point, it often ended up in a drawer or discarded or would literally break and fall apart. They're not built the best things back then, apart from a few, of course. And the paperwork was your warranty. And you have to remember, the older a watch gets, the more of a tool it was. And what I mean by that is like a refrigerator. You don't keep your paperwork and box for your refrigerator, and a watch in 1960s was typically, and again, depending on the watch, it was typically a tool. It's what you used to tell the time. So once that warranty ran out, you had no use for that paperwork. They had no idea these would become collectible, and obviously, thankfully, a few people did keep these things just out of prosperity or with maybe hindsight or just thinking that one day it might be. Or just look, sometimes they're just stored away and they've happened to remain in the same place for that long. So hopefully that covers all the caveats of box and papers. Short answer, no, it doesn't matter. And then the long answer was that bit after it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm always interested. I have a lot of collectors who really do put emphasis on box and papers. And even after that whole spiel I've just given you, still strive for box and papers only. And again, it's their own choice. It's their collection. It's their money. Spend it how you wish. But for me personally, it makes no difference. It's a nice add-on, but the watch is the most important part. Question 2 is from someone who wants to remain anonymous, and the question is, who is your main competition? A great question. The great thing about the watch world, and I have to sort of start with this, is we all kind of know each other, whether it be just through interactions in trade groups or events, or we actually know each other. Like there's quite a few watch dealers I know personally, I'm good friends with. We go out for drinks, we know each other's families, like it is that close knit. And it's an industry built on trust, so therefore it has to be that close knit. Of course, there's some dealers who we probably don't particularly get along that well, and that's just the nature of how every industry goes. It really doesn't matter. The nice thing often, not always, often about this industry is you don't get many bitching and drama and all that kind of stuff behind the scenes with watch dealers. Occasionally you do, but not usually. So in terms of competition, I would say everyone is really my competition because I do such a wide range that I could have certain Rolexes that maybe are in competition with certain dealers, maybe in Hatton Garden or some of the dealers up north, those kind of things. And then I have other watches like certain beautiful vintage Langenzones and things like that are maybe more in competition with Subdial. Then I get some nice vintage Tudors and Rolexes, which again are probably in competition with Fathom watches. And then some of the affordable quirky bits in competition with Bold timepieces over in Bristol. Again, I know Bill personally. So, there's competition all over the spectrum, and it's good and it's healthy for business. It keeps prices competitive and it just keeps the market diverse. I have collectors who just exclusively deal with me, and I am so privileged and honored for that to be the case, but it's not what I personally recommend. I think get to know some of the other dealers, get to see their stuff. It opens up the exposure, and there are times where they have deals I just can't compete with, whether it be a cash flow situation where they want to clear out because they've got another purchase incoming. There's many situations where they beat me. That's the reality. I can't be number one at everything, and neither can they, and no one can be. But yeah, I would say main competition is definitely going to be Subdial, Fathom watches, Bold timepieces, obviously antique watch with the vintage stuff, and then multiple others, of course. If I haven't mentioned your name and you know me, I apologise. But yeah, that's pretty much, I would say, the main ones. Let me know down in the comments, who do you actually think is my main competition? Who is the person you check my prices against? Or is it something like just Chrono24 or eBay? I'm always intrigued. I have a lot of people who use me and Subdial as a basis of price because often we're very close, and sometimes we're even battling on prices over £100 here and there. It's all good for the industry. Question number 3 is from @CRH7742. He asks, what's the least I can expect to spend on a precious metal dress watch, vintage or new? Well, it's going to vary on a few factors. Originality and condition, especially on vintage. You can find some very, very affordable 9-karat gold dress watches from the 70s, for example, that may be quartz or manually wound, and you can probably pick them up for a couple of £100, like not far off scrap value. And that's because they're not maybe going to be the most desirable, not the nicest condition. The cases aren't going to be particularly heavy. They're going to be quite hollow. But I would say for a good entry point, you're going to be looking at vintage Longines, Zenith, Omega, in those kind of 9-karat gold, nice cases, probably somewhere around £600 to £1,000 starting point. Obviously, some of them are going to be far beyond that. You can get really nice gold, 9-carat gold Rolexes, for example, that are going to be far past £5,000. It can really vary. But the entry point, I suspect you can pay somewhere around there. Modern, again, it's going to be probably early 2000s. And again, I don't know how modern you're going, but early 2000s, early 2010s, stuff from like Tissot and Longines, Quartz, presentation watches from that era. Again, are going to be maybe 9 or 18 carat. You can pick those up probably a similar price to vintage, maybe even a bit less if they're smaller case and lighter. The thing that's going to dictate the price of gold that you pay is going to be the quality of the case and the weight, because they have a scrap price attached to them, as in the raw material is worth X, therefore you're not going to get it under that unless you just look out and someone hasn't bothered weighing their watch, which can happen. But for the most part, you're going to be paying X% over scrap depending on the condition. So hopefully that answers your question. I do have a beautiful, as of the time of recording this, a beautiful 9-carat gold Zenith coming to the website. It's going to be £850. It's been serviced, it's been cleaned, and it is beautiful, manually wound on a beautiful strap. So I'll try and remember to put a photo up on screen. Something like that, £850, 1973 presentation. Question 4, at MadMax76ER asks, if you had your own watch brand, what common mistakes major watch brands make would you look to avoid in your own? Great question. There's a few, I would say, and again, it's no criticism of any brand or any person or any brand doing this. It's just I think it can become a very difficult thing to get out of. One good example of this is putting too much emphasis on the brand owner, becoming too big and too much of the emphasis of the brand itself. Now, obviously, this works wonderful for certain brands like Roger Smith, FP Journe, like some of the most important brands in the independent world today are exactly that. They're built around the person. That comes with its own complications down the road or even during. So for example, FP Journe, he only has his hand in certain watches now. So you can buy FP Journes today that are made today that have not really been touched by FP Journe at all. That raises a question for certain collectors. Not everyone, and it doesn't matter to certain people. Where it can become a problem is with a brand such as Bremont, for example, how the two brothers and their story was so integral to what Bremont was and what people bought into. Of course, the watches are fantastic, but I know a lot of Bremont collectors who just bought into the story, the owners, the sort of charm and all of that sort of stuff. And then when that switched, it leaves this big void in the brand itself. Now, granted, they're doing their best. They're trying to do the changes, which we can talk about in another question if anyone has it. But, you know, it raises a big issue. So becoming too much of the face of the brand, I think for a watch brand that aims to expand can be quite difficult, and I think something to avoid. Early days, I think, is very important though, so it comes with caveats. Question number 5, Gary Doherty 600. What's the watch you could have bought that you most regret not pulling the trigger on? I mean, there's been many opportunities over the years where I've had customers sat across from me in this office or my old office even, and they've had a watch and we've not been able to get to an agreement on price, or I've not really had the cash flow just available to buy that watch at that time, or many other factors, and in hindsight, it would have been amazing to own that watch now. But obviously, one thing you have to remember as a watch dealer, I buy today with the intent of selling tomorrow. Therefore, those kind of like, back then I bought a watch for X and sold it for X, now it's worth Y, is almost irrelevant, because I would have bought it for that price, sold it for that price, made my profit and margin, hopefully, and I would have been happy. We don't know where the market's going, and that's why I tell collectors, buy what you like today, you know, on the prices you can afford today. That's all that really matters. But one that sort of sticks in my mind, it's very early days in my career, and there may even be a couple of people watching this video who remember this situation. I was walking around London just for, I think, a watch event, and there was a pawn shop or a watch shop that had a beautiful tantalum and gold Royal Oak mid-size in the window, box papers, everything with it, and it was incredibly cheap. I actually can't remember the price, but I just remember even back then, the price they were asking, it was £3,000-4,000 under the market price as standard. And bearing in mind, it was a complete set, everything with it, even though we were just talking about box and papers. But again, it makes it quite a nice little thing. And I didn't have the money. I did not have the money to buy it at that moment. I called around a couple of people and a couple of customers. And this is super early in my career where I couldn't just raise money that quickly from people if I needed it. And I wasn't able to buy it. And then 2-3 days later, one of the people I had called actually came back and said, oh, actually, I've looked a bit more. That is a great price. I can send you the money. Can you go and check it's still there? I go and check it's there, and obviously it's gone. It's no longer there. that would have just been a great one to own. And it's sort of a kind of nice thing where nowadays I know I'm able to buy those watches, and if I don't actually have the money or the cash flow, I know there's certain people I can rely on to get that cash flow, and we do a profit split or something like that. Back then, I was still very much a nobody and I couldn't do that. Question number 6 is from Comionman7423. Sorry if I butchered that. He asked, what watch do you think is the best investment for £5,000? I'm going to give you 2 answers. I'm going to give you the first one, which I give everyone. Best investment you can make is the £5,000 watch you like the most and you're going to keep and wear and enjoy, because then it doesn't really matter what happens price-wise with it. Obviously, that's quite a cliche answer. I think it's the right answer, but it's not the answer you're probably looking for. And I know it's not when people ask that. The reality is it often falls to the usual suspects, right? And I'm going to give you 2 categories of where you can go. You can go the cliche, but very good route, which is a nice, clean Rolex, something of a date just. And I would recommend vintage personally, because again, they just made far less. And they're not going to make those again. Whereas modern watches, who knows what production numbers are going to go to, when they're going to discontinue them, how many they're going to make, all those kind of things. Whereas we know with the old ones, that's it. That's what is left out there is it. At £5,000, you could possibly get a nice Explorer 1, probably watch only at that kind of price. But again, it doesn't really matter if you're paying the right price and it's a nice example. But as I say, a nice date just, something with a nice, interesting dial. And again, something you like and are actually going to wear, I think is a good place to go if you want to go the sort of cliche route. If you want to go for something a bit more out there and something potentially more risky, but possibly more enjoyable for you to wear, I would say look at vintage gold watches or precious metal watches. If you can find a nice Piaget or a really nice solid gold Omega on a bracelet, potentially, it might be a bit of a push at that price. Something like that could be amazing, like a nice Constellation. I have a few watches like that at the moment, I believe, maybe a bit more than that. But if you can stretch to that, you have the added bonus of the intrinsic value of the gold itself. To put it into context, some of the solid gold watches I've sold may have scrapped, if they were to be scrapped, at like £3,000, and I've sold them for like £4,500. That obviously isn't always the case because there's many other factors that go into it. But I think that's quite an interesting thing. You have intrinsic value from an investment standpoint that you just don't get with a stainless steel watch in the same way. But full gold watches aren't for everyone, so just sort of keep that in mind. But if it was me personally, I'd be going the gold route because, 1, I like wearing gold watches, I think they're cool. But 2, that intrinsic gold value is very appealing to me, especially as gold prices tend to trend upwards. Whereas steel watches and sports watches, it can sort of go all over the place. Hopefully that answers your question, but I would just recommend buying what you like first and foremost. And if you're thinking of like this is truly your investment, you've got a £5,000 pot that you want to invest, I wouldn't recommend buying a watch. I'd recommend maybe going into the FTSE or looking at other investment options. Even gold again is what I'd recommend as opposed to buying a watch for pure investment purposes. And his second question from the same gentleman, and the final question today, also, what's your thoughts on vintage Tudor watches? It's obviously a broad thing. Tudor watches cover so many different options and styles. I tend to have a lot of really nice 60s and 70s, sometimes 80s jumbo oyster prince dates or date days, because they're not date dates, they're date days. I usually have a nice selection of those. They're like 38mm, larger size, really nice dials and cases, again made by Rolex. I think they offer some incredible stuff. If you can really push the boundaries on price or go even earlier, so like the 50s and 60s, you can get some really interesting stuff without breaking the bank. Or if you can spend that a little bit more, you can go with some amazing quirky stuff like the Monte Carlo, for example, chronograph, or really nice Tudor Submariners. There's so many great options out there for something that's just a bit different to Rolex, offers the same feel, the same charm, the same sort of look in a way, but just something far more interesting. So I think Tudor's always a good bet. So thank you all very much for watching this week's episode. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and I hope you've found the questions and the answers interesting. I always look forward to seeing what questions you guys and girls come up with. So please leave them down in the comments ready for next week's episode. I'm going to try and keep this going weekly. As long as you keep providing questions, I will keep doing it. So yeah, look forward to seeing you all again next Sunday. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out yesterday's video with the drop that went on the website, 12 awesome pieces. I would have been wearing the exact same thing and the same watch because it's recorded on the same day. So we'll see you all then. Take care. Bye-bye.